Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join Ipsos in Japan in this presentation/webinar. My name is John Corletto. I'm a brand insight strategist with Ipsos in Japan. And the objective of today is to really be able to assess the impact of COVID-19 when it comes to brand and corporate renewal. What we mean by that is any crisis inevitably comes with a degree of change. So any economic, political, or health crisis will inevitably result in a change of behaviors, in a change of mindsets, and a change of perspectives that will influence what people buy, when they will buy. And thereby, it becomes critical for brands and companies to understand the nature of this change. So what we really want to pay attention to when it comes to this webinar is being able to understand which of this change is immediate, something that we'll only observe at this unprecedented and relatively short period, and which of the changes will last a long time and will have an instrumental impact on the way that we have to organize our corporate activities. So the results that we'll be sharing with you today is a conglomeration of three different online surveys. So the first one is an opinion poll that was conducted in Japan with a sample size of 2,000. The second one is another opinion poll that was conducted a little bit later to see if there were any changes with a sample size of 1,000. And then the third is a global advisor online survey that actually puts these domestic results in context so that we can compare across 14 different countries and really understand the degree of difference or the degree of similarity when it comes to the response to this crisis. So all of these surveys are structured by national representative samples based on the latest census data. So again, just reiterating, the objective of this is to really understand the nature of the change. So we want to understand the behavioral change during the time of COVID-19 and then understand which of those changes in behavior are likely to continue beyond the current crisis and which are just momentary. And the third is understanding what's expected from companies and brands in response to the crisis. So these survey questions and the objectives of this research are very much reflected in the nature of the questions themselves and the way that we ask them. So, for example, when it comes to that first question, or as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, do you plan to continue the following behaviors in the long term? The choices people are presented with are continue to do it, don't continue to do it, doing it regardless of the pandemic, or never do it. That way we can really differentiate which new behaviors had been taken up by respondents and which of those are they likely to drop and which of those are they likely to continue, thereby understanding how their perspectives on life have changed because of this crisis. So we're really trying to seek to understand the delta. So the second question is, after the pandemic is contained, how will you change your behavior around the following activities? So we'll be presenting different specific activities for people to evaluate. And then lastly, open-ended questions that really seek to understand how deeper values and beliefs have changed because of the pandemic. So how people will, how it affects people's lives, or what they now expect of their companies that they haven't expected before, whether as an employee or as a consumer. So the first thing to understand, and a good way to set the context behind all of these findings, is the nature of the pandemic in Japan. So although death rates in Japan are relatively low compared to other countries, as you see on the graph to the right, so compared to the United States, Russia, and Britain, Spain, despite quite a large population, Japan still has quite a low death toll and a low infection rate. There has been a ramping up of anxiety and ambiguity around this particular crisis. So the first confirmed case happened or was confirmed in Wuhan in early January, and it's been months and months, 5 months, and of trying to understand what this means for people's everyday lives. So the nationwide state of emergency was only proclaimed in mid-April, and up until that time, there was a lot of wonder about what all of this meant. So what you get from that is this sense of pessimism. So when you compare Japan to other countries, Japanese people are relatively more pessimistic when it comes to when life will return to normal. So in Japan, only 34% of respondents thought that life would return to normal within 2020, whereas in the average of 14 other countries, that was actually 66%. So that's quite a big difference. Um, there's also this sense of crisis fatigue. So Japan has been on high alert since the first virus became known. The proximity to China and the large number of inbound Chinese tourists meant that people were on edge for months and months at a time. And during that time, the government response has also been quite slow, again, forcing people into that sense of ambiguity. So as the virus continued to spread and the number of cases and deaths kept ramping up, there was still that notion of what does this mean for me? How should I act in response? So within that context, that general context of ambiguity, there were everyday changes in life that people were already noticing and already feeling accustomed to. Well, not accustomed to, but people were having to adjust to. So this sudden shift to stay at home and also for some to work at home actually didn't just create this surface level of change or difference. It actually created a major rebalancing within the space of home, the roles and responsibilities that people in the family were having to undertake, and it actually surfaced tensions that have been long been brewing about gender roles and familial roles in Japan. So the first thing is, 93% of Japanese live in urban spaces where homes can be very small. So just having a few people staying at home or working from home actually forced more people into this smaller space, meaning that any tensions were, more rife or more evident. So, gender expectations versus new realities. Previously absent working fathers who were working in the company would now be at home. They would have to find a place within the rhythm of the daily life of the family, upsetting the balance. Children who would be at school are now at home. So again, this all places quite a lot of burden on Japanese women to carry out multiple duties at the same time. So the childcare and the domestic chores at the same time, more close proximity interactions with all members of the family. And this actually creates quite a lot of stress. So that verbatim on the right, I can't send my child to preschool or kindergarten, so I'm going to have have a nervous breakdown from the fatigue of raising a child. And Corona Rikon or Corona divorce has also become started to trend as a hashtag, and so have numerous reports and concerns of familial tensions, domestic violence, and all sorts. So life at home is a life under pressure. And that's very much reflected in the way that Japanese people view having to spend time with family. So Japanese are actually less likely among these other countries to agree that they're happy to spend time with their family. They rank the lowest at 16%, which is quite a surprising finding. So just as all of these anxieties are happening within the home environment, a lot of anxieties are also happening when it comes to people's outlook towards the future economically. So as businesses close and employees take pay cuts or become unemployed, worries about the economy and individual job security and finances intensify. So a lot of people are predicting that their lives will change because of the economic decline. They're predicting that not just their economic lives, but their lives when it comes to leisure will change. They find that they'll spend less on hobbies and travel, they'll lose their passion in life, their anxiety will increase. And some people have even gone to the point in these open-ended responses to voice really strong concerns. If I lose my job and still have a mortgage to pay, I can't help but think about dying. So it is quite a critical moment when it comes to these economic anxieties, and we'll only begin to see the fallout of that in the months to come. So, lastly, just summing that all up, as we said in the beginning, this pandemic is a shock to the system, and what's really critical is for us to understand which are temporary and which signal fundamental changes, because It's the fundamental changes that we can plan around. So, as Jeff Bezos said, it's those things that don't change that you can create a strategy around. So, basically what we want to do from here is really understand what these fundamental shifts are, how we might group them, and how we might respond. How should companies respond? How will industries change? What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? And by opportunities, we mean everything from messaging to new product development to redesigning services, to even just organizing your corporate activity when it comes to corporate reputation and public relations. The way that we've categorized these different areas of change are 6 ways. So first is protecting the self. Second is discovering inner life. The third is enduring connection with others. The fourth is rethinking life at work, your role in the workplace's responsibilities to you. The fifth is expecting more from companies. So what do people, the general public, expect from companies? And the sixth is environmental sensitivity, changing attitudes towards things like sustainability. So going into the first bucket, protecting the self. So there are 2 ways to see this. The first is COVID-19 is perceived as an immediate threat in 2 ways, both the physical self and the economic self. So although cases continue to decline, the deep economic impact continues to take its toll and will still take its toll in the months to come. So a lot of people's verbatims, as a result of the sharp decline in job opportunities, incomes are plummeting, I feel anxious, I feel stressed from enduring this situation and fear of getting sick. I'm afraid I won't be able to endure this if it doesn't end soon, and I just want to have a stable life. So economically, people are, that's one of the things at the forefront of their minds. From a physical perspective, Japanese people's natural, cultural inclination to be more aware of others when it comes to hygiene issues is being heightened. These senses and awareness is being heightened. So as information, warnings, and advice provided by the Japanese media and government increase, people are also viewing their hygiene and their long-term health differently. And those 3 things are the 3 C's that are repeated in the media all the time: confined places, crowded spaces, close contact with people. These are things that are drilled into the public awareness today. And we can expect that hyper awareness of these 3 areas will continue into the future and will have an impact on people's sensitivity to going outdoors and enjoying outdoor events, or simply the day-to-day hygiene routines that they take after going to the shops, or as they talk to other people. So how do these play out in practice? So according to the data that we've gathered, COVID-19 is likely to push individuals to be more hygiene focused on their daily habits. So although a lot of these you would expect that people were already undertaking, what we're seeing is that there's going to be an increased uptake of these behaviors, already more than what's being experienced today. So 64% will hand wash and gargle more, 55% will avoid touching things while shopping more, and interestingly, although Japan has traditionally been a cash economy, a lot of people plan to avoid using cash as much as possible, using cashless payments and contactless payments. So that in itself presents an opportunity for technological advancement and service advancement when it comes to financial services. So secondly, when it comes to those 3 C's, again, there's a continued fear of crowded places. So although 26% plan to return to attending crowded events and entertainment venues like karaoke, live clubs, concerts, 18% plan to continue to reduce their attendance at such crowded venues. So that puts the onus on brands to develop new ways to generate brand engagement in indoor settings, or even digitally, for example. People will also continue to try not to take elevators as much as possible. So as you see on the verbatims to the right, I can't go out like I used to and can't go unprotected in public. I'm much more sensitive to germs. Once this public awareness around the science behind the spread of the virus, as well as the public policy response, or what's appropriate to undertake to curb the spread of the virus, once people are aware of that, they're less likely to forget that or to adopt behaviors that are counter to that. So beyond the physical self, protecting the economic self. So small businesses are continuing to force to close and companies respond to the crisis. Many Japanese have lost their jobs while other people are undertaking reduced hours and pay cuts. So therefore, this is really a chief concern among survey respondents. And because of that ambiguity around the future, what the future might hold, and the need to undertake more stringent financial planning to accommodate that future, people are beginning to plan to reduce their expenditure. So a lot of people have already reduced their expenditure when it comes to things like luxury purchases, like cars, etc., as well as cosmetics and fashion. But what's interesting is a lot of people will also continue to reduce that spending. So, for example, when it comes to luxury purchases, that difference is more stark in terms of people continuing to reduce their expenditure. But what you find in cosmetics and fashion is about a 50-50 split. But it's still significant. 24% will continue to limit their cosmetics and fashion spending. What we're also finding in response to the economic challenges of COVID and the ambiguity that comes with it is this sense of people adopting new habits or new DIY habits that will reduce costs. So as things like going to the hairdresser are seen as being in close proximity with someone and thus a physical risk, it's also seen to be almost an extravagance. So a lot of people have started coloring their hair at home, and 18% will continue. 18% will also go back to their previous habit of having it colored at a hairdresser's, but it's still a significant difference. 18% will continue, 18% will stop. And what we're also finding is, due to this new sense of economic frugality, you're starting to see changes in terms of perspectives towards things that are more associated with environmental concerns. So 85% of those surveyed, quite a significant amount, plan to reuse goods instead of buying new each time, which for Japan, a country that that traditionally doesn't place so much importance on corporate responses to the environment or things like recycling and whatnot, is actually quite a big difference in opinion. So 85% of those surveyed plan to reuse instead of buying new each time. So moving on, still within that realm of economic concerns, as the travel industry has been almost paralyzed globally, large airlines grounding their fleets, travel restrictions being placed. What we're also beginning to find is, there is a significant percentage of people who will continue to reduce both their domestic and overseas travel. So 68% of those surveyed are currently reducing domestic travel, but 24% plan to continue to do so post-COVID. Of the 30% of those surveyed who reduced their overseas travel, 12% intend to continue the reduction. So just because when this COVID pandemic does alleviate, just because airlines begin to fly again and travel restrictions are made to go away, doesn't mean that people will rush to book their flights and go on their overseas trips again. There will still be that lingering sense of fear about the virus and a growing and lingering tentativeness regarding air travel. So that caps off the discussion about how COVID-19 will affect people's sense of protecting themselves economically and physically. And that's very much on the defense. But now what we want to go into is understanding how COVID-19 will enable people to discover their inner lives. So as the spread of the coronavirus forces people indoors, it's actually helping people discover a sense of leisure and self-sufficiency at home. So people, 51% of respondents plan to continue enjoying oneself as much as possible at home in one's spare time. And just looking at that graph basically shows that, there's a lot of people who have previously thought that life when it comes from life um, a leisurely life is more spent outside, but people are beginning to realize that there's more to be had at home as well. So firstly, when it comes to new behaviors to do with self-growth and improvement show signs of continuing beyond the end of the epidemic. So 35% of those who've taken up new things, new hobbies, or new methods of improving themselves actually plan to continue those behaviors post-COVID. When it comes to online conveniences, again, there are a lot of people who've taken up video streaming services, and 19% plan to continue, whereas only 6% plan to drop that. So, that basically tells a story of people trying to figure out how to spend more time at home and how to spend a more leisurely time at home, discovering new ways of entertaining themselves and signing up to these subscription services and discovering this convenience that they never had before and choosing to stick with it. And it's the same with online shopping. So 25% of those who have started online shopping also intend to continue. And entertainment and a life at home, it doesn't just reside within, filling up your time, your previously empty time. It's about also discovering other joys that make you feel more self-sufficient. So cooking is one example of that. So 45% of those surveyed are cooking more for themselves, and 38% plan to continue to do so. So that's a big uptake in people finding a new sense of confidence and maybe even fun when it comes to a DIY activity like cooking. And it's the same with self-care. So it's not just mental stimulation. This virus is also making people wake up to another aspect of inner life, which is inner health. So people are realizing that their body is actually quite vulnerable and it has to be strengthened to defend against sickness. So whereas there have been other people who have been more carefree in the past, this is really making them open their eyes. So people have made deliberate changes to their lifestyles, and a large proportion of them, and a majority of them who've actually made these changes actually plan to continue these changes. So 43% plan to continue their healthy diet, 37% plan to continue keeping fit. And of course, this has major implications for brands in FMCG and even food and hospitality when it comes to healthy foods and being able to package these for this new consumer. So, some verbatims there. I think it's a good opportunity to reconsider my physical condition. Daily health management is effective, and other people wanting to strengthen their immune system and natural healing power. It's a turning point for many people when it comes to perspectives about health. And it's not just taking up these positive behaviors, it's also reducing negative behaviors. So 30% of smokers and 25% of those who drink alcohol have reduced their consumption and plan to continue reducing post-COVID. So of course, this puts the onus on brands within these spaces to be able to deliver propositions that are less harmful to the health or cater to the needs of this new consumer. So now we've talked about protecting the self and also discovering inner life. How about life with others? And what's really clear when it comes to this is whereas there has been a lot of pivotal change when it comes to the way people view themselves and the way that people view their health and the way people are going to spend into the future, it looks like there's still a large majority of people who, after being faced with these constraints of not being able to go out and drink with friends and enjoy live entertainment or spend time with their family, a large number of people will bounce back and continue the behaviors that they once held, just as a testament to the need to connect with others. So whereas 38% surveyed intend to return to gathering at eating and drinking places, so 22% will plan to continue to reduce it. So the majority is still people returning, but it's difficult to ignore this 22% that will still plan to continue to reduce it. And it's the same with speaking to family. So 38% surveyed plan to resume the time to talk and meet with their family, while 18% plan to continue to reduce it. So whereas this presents a sense of relief for brands that have experiences that are more outdoors and more experiential and more physical, it also puts the onus on them to explore ways to make people feel connected with family and friends, even at a distance. Because the near-term impact of this virus is that a significant proportion of people will still want to continue to reduce their exposure. So the third dimension that we were considering, the third out of six, is rethinking life at work. So perhaps one of the largest changes of this epidemic is just people waking up to realize that there are many different ways to work, and being able to think about what the best way to work for them. So though 26% of those surveyed have reduced commuting and been teleworking instead, only 15% plan to continue post-COVID. So what's interesting about this finding is this doesn't necessarily clue to people not liking teleworking or not liking flexible working. The survey verbatims and the people's open-ended responses actually show that this is due to lack of acceptance of employers of teleworking, lack of employer support for teleworking, even in something as simple as IT systems or work systems or processes. So even someone said there are many jobs where teleworking is feasible, but employers will not offer the opportunity to telework due to lack of know-how, budget, and experience. So this really puts the onus on companies to be able to show their employees that they're committed to individual employee productivity in a way that works for them and in a way that protects them as well. And rethinking life at work isn't entirely just about teleworking. It's also people really evaluating what they expect from their employers and what they also dream for themselves. So the first thing is there's a shared sense that employers are overly focused on making money and not looking out for the well-being of employees physically and economically. So some people have just straight up said companies are busy seeking profit rather than caring about the health of citizens. Or I want to see companies protect employees rather than abandoning them in this time of mass layoffs and reduced hours. And for others, it's really opening their eyes to a future where they might have greater control over their work lives and their futures, and really awakening this entrepreneurial spirit within them. So I think that the telework environment will be more organized in the future, and the choice of ways to work will expand. And some people even saying, if my life changes, I would start a business using my smartphone or PC. People just simply want to have greater control of their safety and also greater control of their productivity. Rethinking life at work also has a direct connection in general to the general public, not just employees expecting more from companies. As these issues come to the forefront in the news, these mass layoffs, as well as these outdated working practices that prevent people from working from home, a lot of people are reevaluating the mindset that they have towards companies themselves. So in the context of the pandemic, many are wondering why corporations aren't demonstrating greater flexibility and resourcefulness. They simply want companies to do more to protect employees and the public and go outside of their traditional remit as profit-making entities to beginning to make bigger moves in the social sphere as well. So some people are saying companies should reform work styles such as telework and improve the treatment of non-regular employees. You can tell that companies are not actively working to change the way they work despite the spread of infection because the number of workers going out has not decreased. And when presented these different statements as to the new role of companies and what they should do in response to the crisis, as well as in the future when it comes to considering their general role in society. What we see from the general public is the strong desire to see that companies are both caring employers as well as good corporate citizens. So in terms of those top responses or top statements that people agreed with, there's this notion of companies are expected to put their number one priority as employee health and continue to introduce telework. And specific industries have specific onuses of responsibility put on them. So financial institutions actively providing loans and services to help troubled companies, for example, and all companies being expected to shift their operations to production of goods that are in short supply at this rough time. And beyond that as well, shifting their advertising money towards information needed by the public rather than campaigns, and making bold partnerships to help overcome the crisis. And what we're really seeing here is that companies are being seen as these entities with a vast range of resources, and the onus is on them to use these resources for the public good, especially at this time. And given that this is now in public consciousness, we can expect that the general public will begin to hold this in much greater weight when it comes to choosing brands in the future. So lastly, the sixth dimension that we want to talk about is environmental sensitivity. So as we've seen in reports and even things that people have posted online over this time, we're seeing cities in China, in India, in Japan, in Singapore itself, presenting blue skies in response to reduced production or reduced consumer activity. So that's been quite surprising for a lot of people, and just goes to show the relationship between economic activity and the environment. And so although Japanese are amongst those least likely to prioritize sustainable consumption across industrialized countries traditionally, what we're seeing with the data that we've collected is the current crisis may actually shift attitudes and spur change when it comes to this front. So looking at these two graphs, so the first one, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the statement in the economic recovery after COVID-19? It's important that government actions prioritize climate change. Japan actually ranks quite highly when it comes to considering climate change during this economic recovery. 64% actually agreed with that statement. And then even when it comes to a more statement with immediate practical implications, like the government should focus on helping the economy to recover first and foremost, even if that means taking some actions that are bad for the environment. So even as people have the economic implications of the virus at the forefront of their minds due to reduced employment or unclear financial futures, the Japanese people were least likely among the countries surveyed to agree with that idea. So, people are really thinking, it seems that people are thinking about the environment more and protecting the environment more as a result of COVID-19. And again, this is quite a pivotal shift to the traditional way that Japanese people have been thinking about the environment. So, we've now gone through 6 different dimensions of change. Some of these dimensions present lasting change. Some of them present immediate change that might not last, or might just be a response to this unique time that we have at the moment. So what does it all mean for your brand? So being able to put these things together, in Japanese society, there's always been traditionally boundaries between spheres of life. Your work versus your private life, your personal health versus the health of others. And that's very much encapsulated in this concept of hone tatemae. So hone being one's true feelings, and tatemae, one's public self. These are things that you keep largely separate. However, what we see with COVID-19 is just a shift when it comes to these things, and that these spheres of life are increasingly blurring and causing not upheavals, but changes in the way that people view themselves at work, at home, and the societal roles that people and institutions must play. So, yeah, as the division between public and private is hard to maintain, new modes of behaviors are emerging. So people are discovering their own sense of self-sufficiency. They're seeking convenience not at home, but also at work. They're demanding increased flexibility even in the workplace, whereas before they might accept things for the way they are. And they're more demanding and vocal about their expectations of employers and the environment, whereas before they might have seen their discrete roles in those systems and have been fine to play the role that they're assigned to. Um, so these expectations actually have large implications for companies. They might have to consider shifting their corporate cultures, shifting the way that they use technology to promote flexible working, increasing their digitization of their services to respond to these hygiene concerns, focusing on people's mental health more, whether that's the general public, but more importantly, their employees. And then also, protecting families themselves. So what we want to do in this next section is just really put forward some thought starters. We're all from different industries in this presentation, and what we just want to show is that these key questions aren't really restricted to any particular industry. So when you look at these, try and think about how this might respond to your to the unique circumstances of your organization and your environment. And what we'll also be doing is going through a range of different responses from other companies throughout the world to COVID-19 and assessing how these might serve as inspiration for our needs. So the first one is protecting the self. As Japanese consumers place more value on health and hygiene, they're becoming wary of physical contact. So in confined spaces, how do we create the sense of hygiene safety? When you're a department store or retail store, when you're in a government or even a financial services that relies on face-to-face interaction, how do we increase that sense of safety? And then as people protect their economic selves and they refrain from non-essential expenditure, how can fashion brands, luxury brands, travel brands, tourism brands deliver on consumer needs in a more economical way, in a more lean way? So we're also seeing this when it comes to new definitions of luxury, like lean luxury. Discovering inner life. So as people are acclimated to their life at home and they're discovering new skills, how do we actually support consumers who increasingly value the satisfaction of self-sufficiency? So more do-it-yourself goods or services, or more products that enable people to fulfill these new functions or their new hobbies that they might have in a home environment. So that really applies to a whole range of firms, whether that's FMCG or tech or industrial appliances. The third one is enduring connection. So it's quite clear that regardless of how much the pandemic has forcibly distanced people, they want to be together and to connect with each other. So how can brands help create the sense of community and connection, especially at a distance? So for example, with education, how can we make people feel like they're learning from each other, yet it might be in a digital environment? When it comes to brand engagement, how do we make people feel close to the brand and to its influencers and celebrities while doing that at a distance? And then the last three, so rethinking life at work. So Japanese consumers are feeling more acutely a need for flexibility and care from employers. So how can we begin to shift workplace culture, policies, and systems to be able to serve those new needs? Challenging the role of the company. So companies are expected to be good corporate citizens by balancing the need for profit with concern for and contribution towards societal well-being. So how can brands partner in meaningful ways or donate in meaningful ways to show that they're fulfilling this expanded role? And then lastly, when it comes to environmental sensitivity, the positive impact on the environment of the COVID-19 economic slowdown has actually increased sensitivity towards these issues. So consumers will be demanding more, let's say, sustainable packaging or transparency around supply chains. And so how can we begin to think about serving this new need for not just products and let's say packaging, but also information, because this is going to drive more choice into the future. So whereas those are more practical concerns and things that actually have to be implemented at a tactical level, the precursor to any implementation at a tactical and an executional level is just looking at the brand strategy in general and the corporate and brand purpose. So from this epidemic and this pandemic, what we're beginning to see is that people are demanding these three things: authenticity, credibility, and effectiveness. So authenticity is actually not staying true to the company mission and brand and using your company and brand's unique assets and resources to help in the way that only you can. Credibility is boosting impacts through partnerships and being a leader in the field and being visible. So being able to demonstrate these in tangible ways, not just through rhetoric or through your messaging. And then lastly, effectiveness. So being able to actually drive that business change, generate goodwill amongst consumers, employees, and the public, and also drive business sustainability at the same time. So it has to work for the public, but it also should work for the company as well. So at this stage, this reconsidering your corporate and brand purpose can seem a little bit vague, but when looking at the examples of other companies throughout the world who have responded to the crisis, it can become quite clear and quite tangible. And that's what we want to do right now. So just on that point regarding authenticity and activities and communications in line with the company mission and brand, I think what's also interesting to consider is that different companies and different industries will have different expectations in how they might have to respond. And this is very much in line with the nature of activities being performed in those industries. So when we look at finance, it's clear that citizens are expecting finance companies to treat customers fairly first and foremost, and that might be more evident than, let's say, caring for the environment or something indexed much lower. Food and beverage companies have a much wider range of expectations, caring for the environment, having a positive impact on society. Tech companies, the burden is on them, or the onus is on them to be open about their business operations and maybe less so treating employees fairly. So although these statements are across the board very beneficial for all companies to take up and to begin to make improvements towards, what we're seeing here is that for the general public, perception of these companies would increase from a CSR perspective. They would increase disproportionately if they performed some activities rather than others. So that's just an interesting point to consider as well. Okay, so now looking at how other companies are responding towards the world and how might these serve as inspiration for us. So firstly, protecting the self. So there are 4 key points that are quite evident here. 4 key points that even when we begin to ideate around what our company or our brand can do to help people protect themselves, these are actually quite useful bases to ideate from. So the first one is understanding which of your resources, capabilities, and assets could be directly redirected towards offering basic hygiene necessities like face masks and hand sanitizers. The second one is if we already have some ideas in the pipeline, how might we use the situation as a chance to accelerate next generation innovation efforts that so happen to curb the spread of the virus? So how can we make things more contactless? How can we make our services less face-to-face and more convenient and on demand? So this is the perfect time to do these things. The third one is adapting offerings. So how might we adapt these our current offerings or our current products to serve the new needs of the consumer? So for example, it might be something as simple as easier to read packaging on FMCG so that you don't have to pick up the product and you can actually view it from afar. Or how can you implement social distancing in your service experience? And then lastly, just being more human. Brands and companies that care more about things like mental wellness or just providing an extra degree of empathy in their brand's interactions. So when we look at the world and how how other companies have responded, it's quite clear how we might begin to think about these things. So fashion and cosmetics brands like Shiseido, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, and Balenciaga, they moved quite quickly to harness their production facilities and produce things like face masks and hand sanitizer. So let's ask ourselves, what resources do we have to contribute to the fight against the virus? Companies like Yandex Russia have been using their self-driving trucks, cars, and delivery machines to roll into American streets and deliver much-needed supplies. So, are there particularly vulnerable groups within our customer base, and how can we improve our delivery and supply mechanisms to serve them? An example of what you might call extreme design, where you take the worst case scenario and design for that. And there are other examples throughout the world. So Board for N, it's a Swedish pop-up restaurant that gives solo diners this unique socially distanced restaurant experience. You're dining in the fields and you get this basket of a full course meal delivered to you. So not only is it unique, it's also created quite a lot of buzz and PR buzz. So how can you offer unique buzzworthy products and services in this limited time? And then services like Headspace. So Headspace is an app that provides guided meditation sessions, and it's also ushering this new, selling a lot to corporates, so that corporates can deliver this service to their employees to manage stress. So they've begun to provide the service for free for you as healthcare professionals. So how might you assure customers that you're there for them at this difficult time and provide them a service like this? And then lastly, contact payments like Zelle, so real-time payments, one-to-one. Google Pay and Apple Pay are being accepted in more and more establishments in order to curb the spread of the virus. So how can we use this opportunity as an opportunity to transition into a seamless and digital service experience? So second one, discovering inner life. So again, there are some key areas or bases that we can begin to work from immediately. So how can we empower people to be more self-sufficient when it comes to everyday tasks and boost their sense of self via education and training? How can we leverage their new technologies like virtual and augmented reality to take physical distance out of the equation to stimulate people's thinking and give them new experiences without them having to step outside their home? How might we assist people in discovering new hobbies and routines and add to their sense of accomplishment and identity? And then lastly, how do we provide people with a means to reconnect with themselves in this period of isolation? So again, clear basis to ideate from and to think about how you might renew your company and your brand in response to COVID-19. So a few examples of that. So institutions like the British Museum offering virtual tours of their exhibits to keep people stimulated. So how can we leverage technology to do that? Home exercise is now a thing. So there are celebrity trainers out there who are planning to donate hundreds of thousands to from their YouTube exercise videos to worthy causes. But broadly, how might you become part of people's self-improvement projects, and what can we offer in that vein? Streaming services from Netflix to Hulu and Disney Plus are also extending free trial periods as a symbol of solidarity with those who are having to spend more time at home or are facing anxiety due to an uncertain future. So how can we actually demonstrate that same sense of solidarity by offering our products or services at a discounted or complimentary basis? And then lastly, online platforms like Masterclass are offering free Q&A sessions with experts in the respective fields. And so they're still continually inspiring people with new ideas, even at a distance. So the third one, the enduring need to connect. So again, for a clear basis. So the first one is, how can we provide new products and services that sustain relationships with friends and family and sometimes even strangers while adhering to social distancing? The second one, help me care. So how can we create ways to monitor the health and well-being of loved ones in this time of isolation, especially if they're elderly or dependent? And the third one is, how can we create and strengthen communities by connecting people with similar hobbies regardless of geographic location? So actually use this time to help develop new bonds, not just strengthen existing bonds. And then lastly, how can we enable people to continually connect with role models, influencers, and celebrities through virtual means? So these are now key pillars of brand engagement. And how do we help people still feel connected to that and feel a sense of hope amidst all of this? So again, three quick examples. So Instagram has now enabled co-watching of posts, so you can enjoy watching posts with your friends while you video chat. So previously, this used to be an individual experience scrolling through your feed, but now it's something you can enjoy with everyone and laugh together. So how might you turn your online service into a collective experience is something that is worth thinking about. The second one is Medtronic and other medical equipment manufacturers are offering new tools to monitor patient conditions. So again, how might you serve the needs of your most vulnerable customers in a convenient way? And this is very much in tune with developments in things like telehealth and remote medicine. So the people are vulnerable because they're at a distance, but it doesn't mean that they should be excluded from your brand and the services it provides. And then even when it comes to celebrities, the world's top tennis players will compete with each other virtually on this on Mutua Madrid for their fans to see. So how can you keep people connected to your brand's ambassadors and also keep your brand's ambassadors active during this time? And then the fourth and the fifth, people's expectations of companies and their lives at work. So again, very straightforward prompts. So the first one, how can you redesign your company processes and IT systems to enable greater flexibility and personalization? How can you implement agile ways of working that don't rely on waiting for an input from someone else and actually doing things more concurrently, more creatively, and having less bureaucracy and flatter structures? How do you equip your team? So how do you provide greater training and education opportunities to employees so that they can feel a sense of ease that they're still improving even if they're doing this from home, and that they feel like they have an edge in an uncertain economic future? And then lastly, how can your company play a role in cultivating well-being, not just profit? So can we offer counseling and support services for employees? Can we increase CSR activities? And so again, other brands are already doing really interesting things. So the New Balance, the brand, has a foundation, and they've set aside $2 million in grants to support community efforts to combat COVID. Slack is also offering free usage of its productivity platform for 3 months as companies look for an online substitute for group check-ins and huddles to check in on progress. So how can you adopt tools like this to improve productivity and reduce the number of face-to-face meetings? And then lastly, there's organizations out there like General Assembly that offer manageable classes and certificates for what they see as skills of tomorrow, from UX to data science. So on Fridays, they offer a suite of free workshops. So how might we offer our employees cost-effective means to continue to upskill? So this might be something as simple as Lynda or Skillshare, or a subscription to one of those platforms that enable them to feel like their organization cares and that they're actually getting better. And then lastly, environmental sensitivity. So the first prompt is, how can you strike the balance between convenience and environmental impact? So in Japan, convenience has always been a driver of choice for consumers, but we might find in the future that the balance has to be struck in a more considerate way. The second one is, how can we improve the supply chain to use recycled and upcycled materials, as well as reduce the environmental footprint of operations? And the third one is, how do we generally accelerate transition to environmentally positive working practices? So not just what we do for the general public, but the way that our employees work. So do we reduce travel? Do we accelerate the transition to implementing a paperless environment? So again, there are a couple of examples that are already happening in the world. So Adidas actually uses ocean recycled plastic for some of its lines of apparel of apparel and collaborates with organizations like Parley for the Oceans to protect marine water. So are there organizations that you can partner with to enhance your green credentials? The second one, the Good Pencil Company, makes pencils out of wood sourced from responsibly managed forests. So it also donates a pencil for each pencil you buy, and gives you a spruce tree seed in each package so that you can plant your own tree at home. So this is an interesting combination of donation, ethical sourcing, as well as a new customer experience, or an interactive way to learn about the impact of planting trees. So how can we mix those things in creative ways for your organization? And lastly, I think COVID-19 has given everyone a chance to wake up to this reality that not everything has to be done in person. And especially when it comes to global things, you might not necessarily have to hop on a plane that comes with lots of greenhouse gas emissions, for example. It's feasible to do these things with new tools like Miro, Mentimeter, Teams, and Zoom that don't allow you, that they allow you not to just speak to each other and to discuss. They actually allow you to brainstorm in anonymous ways, to group insights, to change things up, and to come up with new products and services. So how might you reduce the need to travel through the comprehensive use of these collaboration softwares? So we've discussed quite a lot of things in the last hour, from the long-term implications of COVID-19 to what things might just be momentary and what would bounce back in terms of consumer behaviors. And we've also discussed 6 different pillars and how you might activate these 6 different pillars within your organization and within your brand. But I think what's quite clear from all of this is this is actually a pivotal time not to just respond and show that your organization has and societally aware face and that it can do the right thing for the public and for employees. But it's also the right time to innovate. It's the right time to innovate around things like digital services, or even completely change up the way that your organization works, whether it's working from an agile way, or being able to restructure teams so that they can better work at a distance. So now is the time. So companies will be waking up to these realizations more or less at the same time, and it's going to be a race to see who can implement first. So don't be a laggard when it comes to these things, and get busy now. So over the last hour, we've discussed quite a lot of things, but please don't hesitate to get in touch with the Ipsos team in Japan, if either for comments in terms of what you feel resonated with you, but also if you need some guidance in terms of how to interpret these findings, or if you want to understand these findings a little bit more, but also importantly, how to activate these findings, how you go from understanding these things to actually acting on them and involving your teams in joint ideation around how to interpret these challenges and overcome these obstacles, as well as capture these new opportunities. So thanks so much for joining the last hour. It was a lot of information. Hopefully it was a lot of information and a lot of good and useful insight. And so see you sometime in the future in our next webinar presentation. Thank you very much.